celebrate reading through this Silicon Valley Reads sponsored event. My name is Amanda Turkey, and I am the coordinator of school library services for the Santa Clara County Office of Education. We are going to have the honor of meeting some incredible authors today who have written and illustrated the touching memoir, When Stars Are Scattered, which details the life of Mr. Omar Mohamed and his brother Hassan and the time that they spent in a Kenyan refugee camp. But first, I would like to introduce our County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Mary Ann Dewan, who has been a co-chair of Silicon Valley Reads for several years, and she is a huge champion of this initiative and of all the opportunities it brings to our community. In this pre-recorded message, she will tell us a little bit about Silicon Valley Reads, and she will introduce our amazing guests for today.
Hello, everyone. It's always a great day for reading. I'm Dr. Mary Ann Dewan, your County Superintendent of Schools. I hope you are inspired to read with friends and family today, during March for National Reading Month, and every day after. Today's author visit is part of a larger initiative, Silicon Valley Reads. Silicon Valley Reads brings together the Santa Clara County community through a theme that is explored through books and free activities from January through March. This year, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Silicon Valley Reads with the theme, Journey to New Beginnings. Through this theme, we will explore what a new journey means for different people, living somewhere new, meeting new people, or maybe learning something new about themselves. Each year, Silicon Valley Reads chooses a variety of books for readers like you. One of the books featured this year was written by our visiting author. The co-authors and illustrator you will meet today wrote and illustrated When Stars Are Scattered, a graphic novel about two brothers and their efforts to create a sense of home in the most difficult of settings, a refugee camp. When Stars Are Scattered was named a National Book Award finalist in 2020. Our visiting co-authors are Omar Mohamed and Victoria Jamieson, who is also the illustrator. Omar co-authored When Stars Are Scattered based on his experience. Born in Somalia at age 4, Omar fled to a refugee camp and spent the next 15 years there caring for himself and his younger brother. He came to the United States in 2009 as a refugee, traveling with his younger brother. In 2010, Omar became a United States citizen and was also accepted into the University of Arizona, where he completed his degree in international development. Omar started Refugee Strong, a nonprofit organization committed to empowering refugee communities by providing support and hope through education. Victoria Jamieson is a New York Times best-selling author and illustrator of children's books. Her graphic novel, Roller Girl, was awarded a 2016 Newbery Honor. She lives with her family in Pennsylvania. Please give a warm welcome to Omar and Victoria.
Well, hi, everyone. I am Victoria Jamieson. I'm one of the co-authors of When Stars Are Scattered. I'm joined by Omar. So what we're going to do this morning is Omar's going to start us off and talk a little bit about growing up his life in Dadaab refugee camp. He'll speak for about 10 minutes. After Omar speaks about his childhood, I'm going to talk a bit about how we created the book, how we made this into a graphic novel, and the steps we went through to make a graphic novel. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to have time for your questions. So we can't wait to hear what questions you have about the book and Omar's story. So with that, Omar, why don't you start us off?
Hello, everybody. Excuse me. Thank you for having us. It's really an honor to join you all. My name is Omar. I am the co-author of the book. The story is about me and my younger brother. I'm the guy with the red shirt. The other one is Hassan, my brother. So you may ask or you may wonder why did I choose to share my story. I choose to share my story so I can be a voice for what I called the voiceless, those refugee children who are around the world who don't have the resources or the ability to share their story. And the last victims now, or the last children who are now fleeing from their home country are Ukrainians. They are fleeing for something that they have nothing to do with. So also one or two or three things that I would like our reader to take away from my story is like no one chooses to be a refugee. That's the last thing any human being wants, is to flee from their home country and go to another country as a refugee. And we always forget those who lost their life when they were seeking refuge. A lot of refugees, we always talk about those who came to America or Canada or Europe, but we forget to remember those who lost their lives when they were seeking refuge. And we will never able to hear their stories, or we will never able to hear from them. So those are some of the reasons why I choose to share my story. When I was about 4 years old, there was a war in my home country, and my father was the victim of that war. And then we also, we get separated from my mom, me and Hassan, who was also about 2 years old at that time. So we have to flee with our neighbors. The day that the attack happened, my father was at the farm, mom was at the market, me and Hassan at home. Then we have to flee with our neighbors. That make the separation from our mom, and also also lost our father that day. So how does the fleeing happen? Refugees fleeing is something that you don't plan, that you don't organize. You have to flee from where you are. You know, you leave everything behind and you just run with your soul. That's all you do. And for us, it took us about 3 months to come to the neighboring country called Kenya. About walking 3 to 3. A lot of people died on the way to the refugee camps, and we finally came to Kenya, the neighboring country, and that's where we grew up. That's where we lived for over 15 years. How was life in the refugee camp? Life in the refugee camp was very hectic. Anything and everything that was available in the camp was not enough. That's because the United Nations were planning to host maybe about 30, 40,000 refugees, but over 300,000 of refugees showed up at the border. So that makes a scarcity of everything. Food, you eat once a day. Water, there's no running water for 24/7. There's 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. That's the only time you get water. Hospitals, don't even mention them. Schools are very, very overpopulated, very congested. In one classroom, it will be maybe over 100 or 200 students. We used to sit on the floor, no desks, no chairs at that time. And one notebook, you may write with 5, 6 subjects. One side math, the other side English, in the middle other subjects. One pencil, you may have it and you may use it until you can't hold it anymore. A pen, you use it until you run out of ink. And clothes, you wear one long shirt that goes up to your knee because you can't afford. And almost all the children in the refugee camps at that time were barefooted. No one wear shoes because it wasn't, they were not able, they couldn't afford it. So life was with all these challenges, with all difficulties, we were always committed to get a better education for ourselves, so we can be a better person for ourselves, for our community, and also for the rest of the world. And we knew education was the only way out, because those refugees have 3 options. 1, to go back to their home country if it is safe. 2, to stay in that refugee camp for the rest of their life. 3, to get a resettlement opportunity to Canada, Europe, or America. Whatsoever happens, their education will go with them. That is why we worked really hard. All the children were very committed to go to school, get an education, although there was no resources, there were no support, nothing. And I used to share this with the younger readers because I want them to take advantage of all the resources, of all the opportunities that you guys have. You don't know it is important. You don't know the importance of the school, the library, the teachers, the school counselors, everything, the desks, the iPads, the computers, chairs, desks, all the different resources that the school provides to you. You don't know its importance because you have them. There's a child somewhere in the world who wished he has the resources or the opportunities that you guys have. You have to be grateful with all these resources and opportunities that you guys have. Not only be grateful, but also take advantage of the resources that you guys have. For us, we had nothing. We walk home to school every day. The dab is very dusty, very hot, with no shoes, for 1 hour to school and for 1 hour from school every day. Sometimes you come from school, the most difficult thing was something we call it unknown, not knowing if you're going to eat lunch at home or not. You go to bed not knowing if you're going to have breakfast or not. So it is very hard. Then finally, high school was not available to all the children in the refugee camps. At my time in middle school, we were about 800 students. Only 150 had a space. The rest will end up in the market. So their education will end in middle school. So I know we have few time. Because of that, I have to cut. So I get the opportunity to be resettled to the US. I came to 2009 here in Tucson, Arizona, where I went to University of Arizona, moved to Pennsylvania, started working with Church World Service for 6 years. Then I founded an organization called Refugee Strong. And this Refugee Strong, you can always follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok if you want to see the different projects that we do. So our mission is simple: empowering refugee students with books, pens, pencils, and recently, last year, we opened the first library ever built in that refugee camp. And we give books, pens, and pencils every year to those refugee children, so no child is left behind because he or she doesn't have a pen or a pencil or a school to go to. That at least should be the last thing they worry about. And you can please feel free to check our website, refugeestrong.org, to see the different projects that we do on Facebook, the different pictures, and also on Instagram. So I'll give back to Vicky. Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Omar. So for my portion, I wanted to talk about how we actually made the book. I meet a lot of students who love graphic novels, but graphic novels take kind of a long time to make. So if any of you actually want to make your own graphic novels or making your own comics, I wanted to walk you through the steps of how we made this book. So one of the first steps and one of the first questions we always get is, like, how did we meet? Because I've never been to a refugee camp. I was born in the US, and it was a whole new story for me. So I met Omar because I was volunteering. I was curious about refugee rights and what I could do to get involved. So I started doing small things when I was volunteering. My son, when he was little, we used to make posters, and we'd go to the airport when new refugee families arrived, just to say, welcome, we're glad you're here. I started doing more and more volunteer work. And when I moved to Pennsylvania, that's when I met Omar. I went to his office. He worked at a refugee resettlement agency. And that's a place where new arrivals, new refugees can get help with finding an apartment or English lessons or enrolling in school. And that's how Omar and I met. Omar had already started working on his story and was looking for a co-author to help see it to completion. So we decided to try it out. So the way we began, when you see a book in your library or bookstore, it looks finished, but it was about a 2-year journey to get to this point. So the way we started looked like this. This is the very first version of When Stars Are Scattered. It's nothing special. I buy these notebooks at Target for like $4. But the way Omar and I wrote this book was I would take my notebook and I would get in my car and I'd drive to his office. And he would tell me stories and I'd start to write them down. I'd write them down, but I'd also start drawing pictures at the same time. I've always been a big doodler. I used to get in trouble in school for doodling. I think my teachers thought I wasn't paying attention. But drawing really helps me pay attention. It helps me kind of process what I'm listening to. And luckily, as a grown-up, you do whatever you want. So I doodle all the time. And we did this for a while. I'd say for a few months, we met, we talked, we got to know each other. We were basically strangers when we started this project. So I had to get to know Omar's story. So after a few months, we had several notebooks filled with things like this. But the problem is, this isn't a book yet. I can't publish this because it doesn't make any sense. It's just a collection of ideas. So that's the next step. I take all the notebooks, all the thoughts we've been collecting over months, and I try and organize it and make it make sense. So the next step is to write it all down. I write it out as a manuscript that I then send to Omar and our editor, and we can all read through it and make sure it makes sense, that nothing's too confusing. We didn't leave out anything important. I mean, just imagine if you wrote a story about your life, it's hard to decide what the most important parts are and what you have to leave out, because you can't include everything. So once the manuscript was off to a good start, then it's time for the next step. And this is where things start to get fun for me, because I love to draw. I think writing is still a struggle, but drawing is what I really enjoy to do. So the next step is to take all the words that we've been writing and to really start thinking about the pictures and what we want to show. So when you read a graphic novel, every little rectangle you see on a page is a panel. So that's my next step. I start thinking about the panels and what we're going to show in each panel. So to start thinking about panels, I go back to my trusty notebook and I start drawing some panels. So the first drawings are pretty messy. It might even be hard to see what's going on. I don't usually show these sketches to anybody because they would probably scare off people because it's just a big mess. But to help you kind of decipher what you're seeing, I draw it as if I've got a book open in front of me. So there's a left page and a right page, and each page has panels. So that's what I've done here. There's a left page and a right page, and each little rectangle is a panel. And what I really love about being a graphic novelist is I feel like I'm a movie director because I write the script for the story, I cast all the characters, I design their costumes, I design the landscapes. And when I work on panels, it's like I'm a camera director and I'm deciding where I want to focus my camera. So sometimes I take my camera and I focus really close. Like you can see I zoomed in on a handshake here. Or maybe I want to show how big the refugee camp is. So I zoom my camera out. It's what I really love about my job. You can tell any kind of story you want to. You could tell a science fiction story, a fantasy story, and you don't need millions of dollars for your special effects budget. You need a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can tell any kind of story you want to. So I do the entire book like this. As mentioned, it's a mess. And I know I meet a lot of people who get frustrated when they draw because their drawings don't look the way they picture them in their head. It's kind of the story of my life. This is not how I picture these drawings to look, but it's the first time I'm drawing them, so they're not going to be perfect. I think of this process kind of like playing an instrument. If any of you play a musical instrument, you know that when you play a new song in your instrument, it's not going to sound right the first time you play it. You have to play that song over and over and over again until it sounds right. So that's how I feel about every page in my book. This is the first time I'm playing a page, so I'm going to get a lot of notes wrong. It's no big deal. I draw the page again. I get a few more notes right. I draw it again and again and again. Each time it gets a little better until it's good enough to go in the book. I really don't think you need to be the best artist in the world to make comics. You just need to communicate your ideas clearly. So this is the first step. I draw it again, and the next stage looks something like this. I tend to use cheap computer paper that I steal from the printer. No one in my house can ever print anything because I'm always stealing all the paper. And the drawings aren't perfect, but they're looking a little better. You can tell they're people. That's a good start. And I keep drawing until I get to a stage that looks like this. Again, this is not perfect, but you can see what's going on. And more importantly, I've got words and pictures together. And that's what a graphic novel is all about. It's telling a story through words and pictures. So I do the entire book like this. This is another stage where Omar and I read it really carefully. Our editor reads it. We had lots of other people read the book at this stage too. Other refugees, people Omar grew up with, people Omar didn't grow up with, female refugees. We wanted to get as many different viewpoints as possible to make sure we weren't making any mistakes. I'm sure a lot of your teachers in class have talked about revisions or having a sloppy copy and then a final copy. So to be honest, revision is not my favorite part of being an author because no one loves to hear they made mistakes that they then need to fix. But the truth is, I'm going to make mistakes because I'm a human. And for this book in particular, I really didn't want to make mistakes because I was working with Omar and it's not my culture or my story. I've never been to a refugee camp. So I knew there were so many ways for me to make mistakes. So I'm very grateful to people who told me the mistakes I made so I can fix them because I'm going to make mistakes. So I want to fix them now when the book looks like this. I don't want to hear I made a ton of mistakes when the book looks like this. So even though revisions are not my favorite, I'm glad I had that chance to fix my mistakes. So once my mistakes are fixed, now it's finally time for my favorite part of making graphic novels. It's the whole reason I make graphic novels. So now I take a sheet of good paper. If any of you make comics, I use something called Bristol board. It's just kind of a thicker, nicer sheet of paper. And I draw my sketch one more time. And I make the final art for the book. So this is the sketch. This is the final art. And you might be able to see there's blue pencil in the background. I draw my drawing first with a blue pencil. It's a trick I learned from animation. I used to want to be an animator for Disney. So I draw it first in blue pencil so I can make some more mistakes. And after the drawing looks pretty much like how I want it, I take a paintbrush. I dip it in some ink and I trace right over that blue line and make the black line. A lot of artists work digitally. Many comics artists prefer to make their work on an iPad or using other digital tools. I'm just kind of old school. I like to work on paper. Staring at a computer screen for too long makes me grumpy. So I like to do it this way. But there are still a few more steps to go through. So working on paper is not the fastest way, but life isn't necessarily about being the fastest. So it's a little different than how it looks in the book. I'm going to show you the page in comparison. See, it's page 169. So here's the art as I drew it, and here's the art in the book. So you'll notice a few differences. One difference is color. My art is in black and white, the book is in color. So I do use digital tools. They're very helpful in making creative work. So at this point, I scan my artwork, just like you might scan documents or photographs into the computer. I scan my drawing and we add color. We had a colorist help us. She lives in Atlanta. So she would take the black and white files and kind of treat it like a big digital coloring book. And she would add color like the sand and the sky, but also all the patterns you see in the book, like flowers or stripes. So the color was a really big job and it took a long time. Another difference between the two are the words. You can see I've left these speech bubbles blank, and obviously the book has words. I add the words on the computer because I make a lot of spelling mistakes and it's easier to fix on the computer. But if you're making your own comics at home, you can absolutely write your words by hand. Lots of artists prefer to do that. I just don't because, again, it's a long book. I make spelling mistakes. It's easier to fix on the computer. And the last difference you might notice is the size. My drawing's a lot bigger than the book. And that's because since I work on paper, I need to be able to see all the details I add in every panel. So details like a small baby or someone in the background, it'd be really, really tiny by the time I get to the size of the book. I just can't draw that small. So I need to make the page bigger. Some people might think artists don't need math. I use math all the time, And here I use math to help me scale it up to the right proportion, to use ratios, so I can keep the size the same, add my details, and shrink it back down, and it's still the same correct proportion. So that's about it. You do that 250 times, you got yourself a book. I'm going to show you one more thing before we move into the next section and questions. The last thing I want to show you is one of the hardest parts of my job, which is creating the cover of a book. And this might be a good exercise for you students. Think of a book you really love and decide what you would put on the cover if you were in charge, because you need to tell the whole story, but you can't give away anything important. And you still want it to look appealing, so someone will pick it up. So the first sketches I sent in for the cover look like this. They both basically tell the story of two brothers living in a refugee camp. But my editor felt this one was stronger because so much of the story is about how Omar and Hassan love each other. And she felt by hugging, it did a better job. But she said their expressions looked very worried and sad. And it is a sad story, and lots of sad things happen, but we wanted to show there is hope in the story too, and lots of love and compassion. So in the end, I took this bottom sketch, but I made their expressions a little more hopeful. And I tried to use the colors in the sky. It's a night sky, but it's not dark or scary. I tried to use warmer colors to make it feel not so scary and oppressive. So that ends our section. So we're ready to move on to the next section.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you both so much for sharing your story and your process. And in fact, you answered a lot of the questions that people wanted to know in terms of writing processes and how you two met. So we're going to go on to some other questions. Omar, this one is for you. A lot of people are wondering if you stay in touch with the neighbors that you talk about that are talked about in this book from the refugee camp. Are you still in touch with them?
Yes, and as I said earlier, I usually go back to the refugee camps, do different projects. I just came back this month, March the 7th, from the DAP. Refugee camps, yes, I'm still in contact with all my former friends who happens to be still there in the refugee camps. There are new arrivals that came after I left, like the big drought that happened in Somalia in 2011. So yes, I get to meet all of them. Someone like Jerry, who is one of the main characters in the book, he's still in the refugee camp and is doing well. My foster mom, Fatuma, is still there. She's doing very, very well. So all the kids that I went to school with, most of them are still there now, older, doing different things. So yes.
And one of the things that someone brought up is that you had medical buildings, you had schools, but you had no electricity. How were you able to run those huge facilities without electricity?
Yeah, the DAB has no electricity at night. It is very dark. It gets dark, and you still see children running around dark at night. But the good thing is it is very hot. So the organizations, different organizations that run those facilities usually use solar to have light or even electricity, or sometimes they may have their own engine that only runs for the office. So it is the agencies have in their offices, they have electricity in their offices, but they can only manage within their office, but not outside the office. So it's really hard. Within the villages, within the camp, no electricity. But the United Nations, like UNHCR, Care International, World Food Program, their offices, they have electricity and they also have lights. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So one of the things too that people are curious about, Omar, is your faith and how that's translated. So we've just started the holy month of Ramadan, and that's represented in the book. There's a field with you say thousands, of people who are all praying. What's celebrating the holiday like in America versus at the refugee camp?
The worst thing is Ramadan. It's you fast. Right now I'm fasting. I didn't eat nothing until 5 a.m. and I get to eat I think 7:30 or 8. That's when the sun sets. So the good thing in America is you have something to eat before you fast. or even you have something to eat after you break your fasting, and you have AC air conditioning, you can stay cool inside your house, you can save your energy. So there's many things that you can do to survive. But over there, you're not gonna eat enough food for something called suhoor. That's before the fasting it starts. Something you eat, you're not gonna eat enough. It's very hot, it's very dusty, it doesn't have nothing to, even you can't sleep a day. I tried when I was there. It's very, very hot. You can't have a nap, very hot. You'll be sweating. And then after you have been fasting for 12, 13 or 14 hours, then you're breaking your fasting, you have nothing to eat. That is also one big thing, a big difference. And I remember growing up, at the end of Ramadan, they celebrate Eid. So that's a big holiday for everybody where children are giving candies. Whoever can afford buys new clothes. That is the day you put on. And sometimes you save like, then until you raise like $1 for the whole month. Anything someone gives you, you save. So you can at least buy one t-shirt or a pants. So it is tough. That's why for us, our organization at Refugee Strong, we usually do a food distribution every Ramadan, every fasting. It's gonna happen maybe next week or another week. We're just planning, and we just support the most vulnerable among the vulnerables. Everybody is vulnerable in the camp, but you want to select the most who's most vulnerable. So we'll be giving them a food that will last for the whole month, at least those families that will be picked, maybe about 100 or 200 families. But you can imagine 300,000, but you're only able to 200 families for every month. And I hope it is something for them, and I hope we get a lot of support so we can do such things to larger number than 200 or 100 families. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this probably is a question for both of you. One of our guests who are watching this just asked, do you plan on writing more books? So maybe Victoria, do you want to start? And then Omar, you can answer after Victoria.
Sure. Lots of people do ask about sequels, but I can let Omar talk about that. I am working on different graphic novels now. I'm working on my next middle grade graphic novel, which will be a little bit younger, I think, than my previous books, a little younger than When Stars Are Scattered. The character is going to be in about 4th grade, mostly because I grew up loving books about Ramona Quimby, and she was 8 or 9 years old. So it'll be a little different and a little younger. I've got a few books that I'm working on now, so I'm very excited to work on those.
Omar, what about you? Are you planning a sequel?
I hope so. After I came back from Georgia, Victoria, that's what I was thinking. And it's a common call that I hear about the sequel. And I was thinking 2 nights ago, I will just start now writing the story, the same as I did with this one. So have the story ready, and then see what happens next. But right now I'm working on a picture book for also younger audience about the book. When it started, I think it only said few things about my life before the fleeing. So I want to see how life was in Somalia before me and my younger brother and Hassan and my parents doing okay in Somalia before fleeing to the refugee camps. So that's what I'm working right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Hassan live with you now is another question that I got.
Yeah, Hassan usually lives with me here in Pennsylvania, but he's now back home, not home, but actually back in Kenya with my mom and all my kids. I'm a father of 6 children. I have 3 boys, 3 girls. All of them are back in Kenya with my mom. And the reason being, my mom didn't enjoy seeing her 2 boys grow up. So it's kind of giving us some closure to see her grandchildren growing up with her. They have been there for a while. And now I think they will come back in July so they can start schools when school start in August. So yeah, only the young one is here.
Oh, thank you. That's good to hear. So when you started writing your story, Omar, what did you want people to think or feel? I know you can't predict, but what did you want people to know that they didn't know before reading this book?
One thing I really wanted people to know is being a refugee is not a choice. That's one thing I really wanted to know, because there are people who always tell you, go back to where you are from. You don't belong here. They don't know who you are. They don't know you. They don't know how you came here. So it's really hard. You gotta know people first. Talk to them, who they are, how they came to America, where they are from. Then you can judge them after that. But you don't know who he or she is, and you tell them go back. You don't belong here. It's very sad that we immigrants or even refugees have to deal with every day. And one thing I really wanted people to understand was I didn't choose to come to America. I didn't choose to flee from their home country. I was a child. It was something that's done by people who are elder than me, the same age as those who are telling me, go back to where you are from. So it's really sad. And that is one big message that I really people want to understand. Any refugee that you see, being a refugee is not a choice, but it's a circumstances. I always tell young audience, it can be you tomorrow, who knows? Who thought Ukrainian children will flee from their home country in 2022, in 2020? Who knew? Who thought that? But now it happened to them. So it can happen to us. Who knows? We may flee to Mexico or Canada, God forbid. So I don't know. It's really sad thing, but it's not a choice. It's not a choice. Thank you.
Thank you. And kind of a follow-up question to that. You touched on it a little bit. I'm sure middle school is when we think about kids really being bullied and really trying to find out who they are and where they belong and how they fit. And from the book, I gathered you came over older, more kind of high school aged. Did you experience bullying, or like you said, people telling you to go back to your home country when you came over here? What was that like?
Yeah, it was really tough. The culture, the people, everything was different. I had an accent. English wasn't my first language, and I couldn't speak fluently. So I usually stayed quiet because I felt shy that they're gonna find out I'm from another country once I open my mouth because of my accent. I'm black, I'm Muslim, and also I'm an immigrant. So I mark all the three that's been picked on in in this part of the world, which is very very sad. But I never wanted, or I never thought of someone else defined who I am. I am who I am. It is God who created me. I'm black. I didn't choose to be black. I'm from Somalia. I didn't choose to be where I'm from. It's all chosen for me by the one who created each and every one of us. And I always tell the younger audience, do not judge people because they don't look like you, because they don't dress the way you dress, because they are not from where they are from, or because they don't speak the way you speak. And I tell them, you can only judge others if you design yourself. You said, God, I want to look like this. I want my hair, my nose, my face to look like this. Then you can judge others. But who are you to judge other human beings when you have nothing to do the way you look? It was all given to you by the same God who created the other person. So it is, and whoever tells me go back to where you are from, I always tell them, everybody came to this country one day. We just happens to be the last arrivals. So do not close the door behind you. Someone else opened the door for you. So don't close the door behind you. So we all came to this country. We just happen to be the last. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great. And it looks like we have time for one more question. And Victoria, this is a writing question. And the question that people want me to ask is, what happens when you get writer's block? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a tough stumbling block when you get writer's block. So writer's block usually happens to me in the beginning of a story when I'm just developing the characters and trying to decide what actually happens in the plot. I think when I get stuck in a story, I always come back to the characters. I try not to force characters to do things that's against their personality. So I usually just take kind of a break. Sometimes going outside will help me when I get writer's block, or even taking a week off and I'll watch movies or TV shows. But the whole time I'm still thinking about my story, because often if I'm watching a TV show, I'll think, oh, that's something I could use in my story. So I think that's my number one goal. When you get writer's block, like, don't give up on your book. Always keep it in mind and kind of keep your antenna up for things that you might be able to use in your story.
Okay, I lied. Excuse me. Thank you. I lied. One more question. Have you both been surprised at just what a phenom this book has become? You were the National Book Award finalists. It's like on every list everywhere, best of books. Were you surprised at how well it was received?
I'll let Omar have the last word, but I was definitely surprised. I had a lot of insecurity, I think, starting this book. It was so different than my other books. I really wasn't sure how people would receive it. And when I got worried about that, I would have to just turn off those feelings and think my job is to tell Omar's story. It's not to please anyone else. That was my number one goal through everything. Just tell Omar's story the way he wanted it told. So everything else is just icing on the cake, I think.
Yeah, I think I was really, really surprised the reception, because when I first shared my story, I didn't know what I was getting into. I had zero experience with any other previous books. So I had no idea. Are people going to pick on you? Are they going to welcome you? Are they going to like or dislike your stories? But I just let it be. However, my main mission was, my story is just like any other refugee story. So a similar story. So I wanted to put it out there on behalf of other refugee children around the world, and don't worry about the outcome, both positive and negative. But I'm glad it had a huge impact on many children. Thank you.
Thank you. Me too. It is such an amazing story and I love it. And every time I go back and reread it, I find some little detail either in a picture or just in thought that I just didn't see before. And I love it. And I want to thank you, Omar and Victoria, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us about your story. And I would also like to thank all of the students and teachers and educators who are here today. And if you would like to find out about more fun activities and author events, I do recommend that you go to siliconvalleyreads.org. I want to thank you, and everybody have a great Thursday and happy Ramadan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.